Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'll be doing the spoiler tag that I was tagged in by BookBuds. I will link out to their channel. Here's a little blip of them. They're a very fun duo who just kind of have a lot of silly and fun videos talking about all kinds of different books. This was fun to read, and the more I've seen of their stuff, the more I enjoy it. So I definitely recommend checking them out if you have not already. And then let's get to the spoiler tag. So the first question is, what do you consider to be a spoiler? And I always try to be careful and toe the line. Usually if I'm talking about anything that's even mildly spoilery, I try to give a warning. Just because anything that kind of gives you more detail than you want to know. I like to go into books pretty blind, so I usually don't even get super in-depth into my explanations of what's going on. I've tried to, and I hope I do a good job, I guess, in my reviews, but I've tried to develop like a good sense of vagueness where I'm giving you a feel for what it is, but not actually spoiling anything. So I tend to be pretty conservative with spoilers from my end. Question 2, does the genre you're reading impact what you consider to be a spoiler? I mean, I typically read fantasy, and so, I mean, basically anything that's going to actually give away the plot, I guess. If it's just more information, because like there's definitely books where I could talk quite a lot about, give a lot of information, and it's not going to give away what's happening with the plot. If I was reading something where details would end up giving away more things about the plot, I guess. I don't know what specific genre that would be, but I don't think it would make too much of a difference. I'm totally fine to have some details. I just don't want to know what happens because, granted, I'm a big rereader for books that I really like and I still enjoy them, but if I'm going through the first time, I just like to experience it that way. And I've had books where I knew what was going to happen and it didn't necessarily ruin it, but I like to just kind of go in and not have any expectations or thoughts about a book. Number 3 is all the best bits are in the trailer. Sometimes the synopsis can be too detailed. Do you research books prior to reading them, or do you go in blind? Well, oops, I just answered that question to an extent. I prefer to go in blind. Now, it's gotten me into trouble a few times when I start a book that I really don't know anything about and I don't care for it, or it's really not at all what I expected. But more often than not, I've kind of enjoyed that. I've started books where they were not at all what I was thinking they were going to be, and ended up quite liking them. And once again, some I haven't, but it's just kind of, it's nice to go in to not really know necessarily what you're getting instead of knowing exactly what it is going to be. It's just, if you know too much, once again, I feel like you develop some expectations, some thoughts, and I like to go in and have things, really, I don't know. I'm just experiencing it and finding out if I like it or not and kind of what's going from there. So that's typically how I prefer to read. Sometimes some information can be helpful, like to warn you, like, hey, this is really slow and it gets better. But I do agree, you do see, like, if you're watching a movie trailer, especially for comedies, usually the best jokes are in the trailer for a lot of them, and then you watch and the rest of it's not that good. So I think we give away a little too much. Trailers used to be a little bit more vague. And that's why, like I commented, I try to keep my reviews vague enough that I'm not going to give you too much if you do kind of want to go in a little bit more blind. But that's me. Question 4. Sometimes the introduction or translator's note can spoil the ending, especially for classics. Has this ever happened to you? Usually not, because I actually do typically read introductions, and sometimes you do get versions where it does talk about big events. I'm trying to think. There was, I think it did happen one time for something I hadn't read, and it just kind of said, oh, and then when this huge event happened. But a lot of times, those tend to be, especially for like the introductions, in like a special edition. So maybe it's something I've already read. So I can't think of anything offhand. But if you're writing an introduction for a book, don't spoil the book in it. Even if it's a special edition, some people might be reading it. So I would probably be a little bit peeved if that happened. I mean, I'd still read the book. What that actually makes me think of is back in the day, and I rarely see it anymore, but it used to be really common, you'd have like an actual excerpt of the text with really no context. in the very front. And I think it was looked at as like, give it a read, see if you're gonna like it. But sometimes it like did kind of spoil things, and you're like, oh, so like that's gonna happen. And I've always thought that was kind of odd to have. So let me know in the comments. Do you like those? Do you know what I'm talking about? The little excerpts they would have? Because I'm curious now. I haven't thought about that. All right, number 5. Name a time somebody spoiled a novel for you. That's mostly happens for like books that I know I'm not going to read. I don't really care if somebody spoils for me. So I've had people be like, I mean, what happens? Go ahead and tell me, because it doesn't really bother me that much. So, I mean, for example, I never finished reading Harry Potter. I didn't really care that much how it ended. I I know that's heresy. I was just never super into Harry Potter. I feel like I'm even in the right like age bracket that I should be a fan, but I never really was. So like I was told how it ended. I heard it everywhere. I heard spoilers in general for Harry Potter for several books before reading. I read most of them, but it's just like, so that happened. But I was never that invested, so it didn't bother me that much. But as far as books that I have read, I've accidentally found spoilers, which I always kick myself for. I try to be pretty careful, but I've not had anybody actually just specifically spoil a book that I did want to read that I can think of. All right, number 6. Have you ever spoiled a novel for somebody else? So I'd say not intentionally, unless once again they asked. I've had somebody say, like, "Hey, I'm not going to read this book, or I'm not going to finish it. Can you just tell me how it ends? Because like I care enough to know, but I don't want to read it." I'm like, that's fine. If you legitimately want a spoiler, I've had people say that they're okay with it. And I know some people it annoys them to like if they want to know something, they want the confirmation and they'd rather know than wait. So I'm okay with that. If it's like a huge thing, I think it's going to mess up your reading experience, I probably still wouldn't tell you. But I really try to be careful not to spoil things for people, because I don't really care for spoilers myself. So I don't want to, and something spoiled for me, I don't want to spoil it for you. All right. Number 7. If spoilers ruin novels, are there some authors or genres you can't reread? So I touched on that just a little bit. And if I read different things, I imagine it'd be a little bit different, because like BookBuds actually in their video mentioned like, you know, mystery books or even sometimes thrillers. The whole point is that you don't know what's going to happen, so that might not be good on reread. I don't really read those, so I don't know, but I do really like a book. For me, if it's a book that I really, really love, it should have reread value. And so if it is a book that's only good like it's not going to be good if you already know the ending, I feel like that means it's actually not necessarily that great of a book. At least the way that I rank books, because when I look at my top books, reread value is a huge part of it. Hence Wheel of Time, that I have read many times, and I still will have moments where like I'm like, oh, this is crazy, even though I know what's going to happen. Rereading, for when you forget things a little bit. But yeah, if I read a book and I'm like, I enjoy it, but I don't know that if I'll ever read it again, that probably means that I'm going to likely unhaul that book at some point. It doesn't even necessarily mean I hated the book. Just if it's something where I really wasn't feeling it, then I'm probably going to just say, okay, that's enough. So that's kind of how I feel about that. Number 8, when reviewing, are you spoiler free? Does this limit your ability to discuss? So I do both. It depends how much I have to say. Sometimes there's a book and things I want to say, I have to give spoilers, so I'll specifically note, I am going to talk about spoilers. I put the timestamp at the bottom so you can skip past it for those types of videos. But I try to, for the most part, keep my reviews spoiler free, just so that anybody can watch them. I know some people do separate spoiler free and spoiler reviews. I don't typically do that. I've really thought about it, because I like that, because if I haven't read it, I can just watch the spoiler free, and if I have, I can watch the spoiler. But it's not something I've tried at this point. But I try to, for the most part, keep pretty spoiler free. In some books, there's so much I can talk about, even being spoiler free, that I just don't bother with spoilers, because I know it's going to be a long enough video. And then you have some videos like Ship of Magic, where I talk both and end up with a half-hour video. My old videos, I used to talk spoilers a lot more, still with like the note. But I've switched to more spoiler free because for one, it helps the videos not be terribly long, and it just once again kind of depends on how much I have to say about the book and if I can say it in a non-spoiler fashion, which often I can. It just kind of depends on what it is. So number 9 is the tag question. Okay, so yeah, so I don't normally actually tag people. Maybe I'll start. I actually know several people now that I could tag. But usually I just say if you're watching this and you want to do it, go ahead and do it. I'll link out to the original person who created this tag. I do at some point want to create some and then tag people in those, but it's hard to know if people have done a specific tag or not too, and maybe I just haven't seen it. So I just usually say, hey, if you haven't done this and you want to do it, do it. Let me know. Make sure to comment and let me know if you do it. I'd love to watch your video as well. But that is mine for the spoiler tag. Thanks again to BookBuds for tagging me in this. Make sure to give this video a like if you enjoyed it. If you want to talk books, check out the link to the Discord in the description. And of course, if you'd like to see more of my content, make sure to subscribe.